Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Maggie, for inviting me to come here. I'm pretty excited to talk about some of the research that we're working on, and yeah. Is that better? Okay. And I do want to call out our research coordinator, Destiny. She's over here, so all of this work was done hand in hand with her, so I just want to make sure we acknowledge her as well. So kind of a pun title, but we're going to get into this quote. This is actually something one of our farmers said about utilizing tick bite prevention strategies. They're too broke and they're too tired. So we'll talk about that. We were trialing what we're hoping to be a feasible tick bite prevention strategy on ag properties. As you would assume, outdoor workers are at a very high risk. We're all at a very high risk. We exist in the Northeast, but especially outdoor workers. You know, there's no avoiding tick habitat. They work directly in it. So we try to work with them and find solutions to some of the problems that they have. So as was said, I'm the Associate Director of the Tick-Borne Disease Research Center at Binghamton, and I also work at the Northeast Center for Occupational Health and Safety. So we are one of 12 NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, funded centers in agricultural health and safety. So we work with farmers, fishermen, and loggers on different health and safety projects, things that are priorities to them. So tick-borne diseases are brought up time and time again by them. There's no avoiding them, unfortunately, for them. What are easy, cheap ways for them to avoid tick bites? And also, what do they do, especially farmers? You don't get sick time as a farmer. You've got animals, you don't have disability, you don't have any of these things. So if you go down with a tick-borne disease, and if something becomes chronic, we know plenty of farmers that have had to sell their farms. They sell off all their animals, you know, and then maybe luckily they recover in several months, but your animals are gone, your farm shut down. You can't just go back. So we want to avoid that from happening. So I'll quickly go through, I think Holly went through a lot of this in her talk, so we'll breeze through kind of the common ticks and tick-borne diseases we see here in New York. I want to talk a little bit about how ticks and tick-borne diseases have changed over time. So who has lived kind of in this area of New York for more than 15 years? Okay, so let's go back to 2000. Who had huge problems with ticks in 2000? Okay, what about, let's say, fast forward to 2015. Did you see a lot more ticks? Exactly. So we'll talk about kind of why that's happened. And then I want to talk about the randomized control trial that we're working on with Thermacell tick control tubes. Does anybody use Thermacell tick tubes on their properties? Excellent. So some common ticks found in New York. This is not a very exhaustive list of the different human pathogens. Holly had a much more comprehensive one in hers. But deer ticks, they're kind of our number one enemy. We like these the least. We don't like any of them, to be clear. But Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Bartonella Powassan virus, and as Holly said, alpha-gal as well for the deer tick, and this is what we see most commonly around here. We do also have the American dog tick that can carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia. We see these a lot more further downstate, kind of Hudson Valley. Long Island has a huge problem with these, but we do have them up this way as well. And also the Lone Star tick, we're seeing more and more of these. I got bit by one last year. Luckily it didn't result in anything. But they carry alpha-gal syndrome, which we talked about, tularemia, ehrlichiosis. We also have the brown dog tick. This one in the Northeast is not known to carry any human pathogens. It does carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever in the Southwest. We don't see these very often, and I don't have it on here, but Dr. Ahern brought up the Asian longhorn tick. So I think 2017 is when we found the first one in the United States. So for humans, they could become a huge problem, especially since they reproduce asexually, but especially for farmers. The Asian longhorn tick, it's kind of like a slow burn for farm animals. So especially, you know, we're in New York and I work in Vermont, so dairy farming is huge. This is a huge issue for farmers because it actually, getting bitten by the Asian longhorn tick can mess with milk production in cows, which is a huge issue for farmers for sure. So the life cycle of a deer tick, generally about a 2-year life cycle. So it starts out, they hatch from the eggs as larvae. Generally, these are not a huge issue for us. Borrelia miyamotoi does transmit transovarially in very small numbers. Borrelia burgdorferi, not so much. So generally, these are not too much of an issue. They are about the size of a pinhead, so it's pretty good that they're not a huge issue because finding them is near impossible. They are very, very tiny. Typically when I see them is when I'm collecting ticks. I know I collect ticks for a living, I don't know why, but you get 200 to 300 at a time on the drag, but you can barely see them. It's only when they start moving. Sorry, I'm grossing everyone out. But they'll take a blood meal, either on generally like a small mammal, a lot of times a white-footed mouse, and they are the most competent reservoir. So that's when there's a chance for these human pathogens to transmit from the mouse to the tick. So in the nymphal stage, this is the one that's most likely to infect humans. So these are out in the summertime. This is when we're interacting with our environment more. They're only about the size of a poppy seed, so still really hard to see. So they'll take a blood meal, sometimes on us, unfortunately, and they might transmit something, and then they'll molt into the adult life stage. Adults, this is the only stage where you can tell the morphological differences between the two, between males and females. So we had a tick in here before. But the females are kind of that dark reddish orange color, and the males are typically black or dark brown. So they generally mate a lot of times on the host, hence deer tick, a lot of times on white-tailed deer. The male has served his purpose, he has died, and then the female goes and lays her eggs. She'll overwinter and then she'll lay her eggs the next spring. And generally they lay about 1,200, maybe 2,000 eggs. So this is why tick control is so hard, because even if you say you have a 90% die-off rate in larval ticks, the population is still growing. So why not take on a problem like that? So talking about feeding, we had a very good visual that just walked in before. But in terms of how they feed, you have, does this work? Can we, oh we can. So this is called the hypostome right here, blocked by the link of the picture, sorry. And the palps right here. So generally what you see on the tick are the palps. Those lay laterally on your skin. That hypostome, just chainsaw straw is probably a good description of it. But that goes in, you see these backwards facing barbs. So has anybody taken a tick either off themselves or a dog or a horse or a cat that's been on for a while? So you kind of get that snap. So the deer ticks actually secrete this glue-like enzyme when they're feeding, so they actually get cemented into you. So you always hear use petroleum jelly, use peppermint oil, use a burnt out match, something like that. So if the tick hasn't been feeding long, yes, that will work. However, if you don't know how long that tick has been attached, if it can't detach because it's cemented in, that's not going to work, and it's only going to make the problems worse. So always tweezers, always as close to the skin as you can, and pull up. So here I'm going to show you a couple of maps. So these are from the CDC. So again, we know incredibly underreported anyway from the CDC, but this is 2001. So these blue dots, it's just randomly dropped in the county from which it was diagnosed in. So 2001, up by us, not so much an issue yet. 2006, 2011, 2016, we will talk about Massachusetts, I promise. 2019, we will still talk about Massachusetts. And 2023. So no, Massachusetts did not figure it out and not tell the rest of us. In 2016, they changed their reporting guidelines, so they no longer jived with the national standards. So that's why it looks like Massachusetts is doing well. They're not. 2023, they're back to the national standards. So as you can see, kind of the only place we see in New York that is not a huge problem right now is the high peaks of the Adirondacks. So unless you want to go live on a summit of one of the high peaks, ticks are an issue in New York. So just to exploit my dog for educational purposes. So out of these four, which ones do you think, when are ticks active? You can just yell it out if you want. Yes, okay. I couldn't stump anybody. So yes, actually, not so fun fact, I have pulled a tick off of my dog in every single one of these pictures. So anytime temperatures are above 39 degrees, deer ticks become active again. So, how many midwinter thaws do we have now? I mean, I guess this winter was a little bit colder, but previous to this winter, we have so many of these midwinter thaws. So even if you have snow on the ground, if you've got temperatures above 39 degrees, the ticks can be active. So we have people that are getting bitten in the middle of blizzards and things like that. So it's just something to keep in mind. But why is this happening? We have a myriad of reasons for sure. So climate change is a big one. Ticks, like we said, they weren't as huge of an issue like in the early 2000s. Absolutely, people had tick bites, people had Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, all of that, but not in the numbers we have now. So as we're warming, ticks are able to move further up. They're able to live at further northern latitudes. Canada didn't have much of an issue, but it's been starting for actually a little while now. By 2080, Canada's kind of be like the rest of the US, and it's going to be a big problem. So how is climate change actually impacting tick-borne diseases? So we have longer questing or inactivity periods. So we have nicer, warmer weather longer. So ticks are more active for longer periods of time. Typically, the public health messaging is, wintertime is kind of the safe time. It's really not. There are safer times than others, but there's no safe time. So they're out there looking for food for longer periods of time. They also have these increased survival rates. So we're having these mild winters, so we're not having the die-off of ticks that we used to. Even if we have die-off, if it's not upwards of 95%, tick populations are still increasing because one tick turns into 2,000. So geographic expansion, like we showed on that other map, they can move to further west, further north latitudes now, and they can survive in those areas. And we're also seeing this increased incidence of tick-borne diseases. So this one's twofold. I think there are a lot more, but I think also the recognition is there now. So, the numbers look like they're rapidly increasing, which the numbers are certainly increasing, but the increase in awareness for physicians for testing has also increased. So we're finally recognizing cases that have been there all along. Another big one is land use. So generally, you have these sprawling, intact forests. So you have a high species biodiversity. So you still have ticks, you still have Borrelia, you still have your competent reservoirs like your white-footed mice, but you also have your predators for rodent control. So one, the ticks have a lot of options of what they can feed on, and some things are more competent than others. White-footed mice are about 90% competent. So if a tick feeds on a mouse that has the bacteria, about 90% of the time it'll pick it up. Chipmunks are about 75% competent, squirrels are about 50% competent, so on and so on. Generally, the larger the mammal, the less competent they are. So you have your predators, you keep your rodent populations in check, they can feed on a bunch of different things, so everything sort of stays in balance. However, we came in. So, you build your suburbs, even rural, you build your farms, but you have your roads. So you're making these tiny little microecologies. So you're driving out the predators, you're increasing these competent rodent reservoirs. So you're increasing survivability of the most competent host, most competent reservoir, and you're increasing the survivability of the vector, the tick. So you're just increasing this over and over. So to get into what we're doing with ag workers, so surprisingly enough, nothing has been done in the northeastern United States with farmers or loggers and Lyme disease, or tick-borne diseases in general, since the 1990s. So remember that question I asked you at the beginning? Were ticks really a huge issue in the 90s? They were an issue, for sure, they existed, but not a huge issue. So, why have we not done anything to help our outdoor workers since then? So Europe is on top of this. Europe is doing great. So they work with outdoor workers all the time to see, and studies have actually shown that farmers are the most at-risk outdoor worker group in all of Europe for tick-borne disease transmission. Their risk is higher than hunters, and their risk is higher than forestry workers. So they've done seroprevalence studies for Borrelia, and they reported between 20 and 60% of farmers are seropositive, which is huge. So we wanted to look at a project. Farmers are busy. They're so busy. Farming is not really an economically profitable industry anymore. Unfortunately, nobody wants to pay for their food. So farmers, you're a farmer because you're passionate about it. It's not because you're going to make millions being a farmer. So we wanted to come up with something feasible for farmers. We're not going to come up with this, because it could be the best intervention in the world. If nobody's going to adopt it, it's not useful. So we wanted to find something cheap and something simple for them. So we kind of had two parts to this study. The first one, we wanted to do these scientific dialogue gatherings. We weren't going to call them that because that's boring. But we wanted to understand kind of what their level of awareness was and what their perceptions of tick-borne diseases were. And we also wanted to use that as an opportunity to promote participation in the randomized control trial. And then the second aim was to do the randomized control trial with the thermocell tick tubes. I'll go over how they work in a few slides. And see, these are designed for residential properties. There have been studies that have shown these are very effective on residential properties in decreasing tick populations. So can we sort of recreate this in agricultural properties? Because it's something cheap, it's something easy, and we think farmers would adopt it. So we recruited 45 farms in southern Vermont. So we're in 5 counties in southern Vermont. We chose dairy and livestock farmers and farm workers to participate in this study. That's kind of the dominant industry. Everybody always asks us why we didn't do maple. So some of these dairy farmers also do maple. But we didn't choose maple specifically because generally when you're tapping trees, it's adult tick season. So absolutely you're probably gonna be interacting with ticks, you might get bitten, but 90% of Lyme disease cases are attributed to the nymphal tick, which is not what's active when you're tapping maple trees. So it could be the inverse. It could be that, farmers are more at risk, maple tappers at least, are more at risk from adult ticks because that's when they're active, but generally people find adult ticks before they've been attached long enough to do anything. So we wanted to stick with dairy and livestock farmers because their season is all year. There's not a season, it's all the time. So our tick talks, because that sounds a lot better than scientific dialogue gatherings. So we tried to do these online to chat with farmers because this is in Vermont. In 2022, when we started this study, Vermont had the highest incidence for both Lyme and anaplasmosis in the country. Vermont is still #1 for anaplasmosis, but Rhode Island has pulled ahead for Lyme now. So we tried to do these online because we're in New York and Vermont is far. No farmers came, which is sad. But we did have great discussion with folks that work with farmers. So this was no longer a recruitment strategy. We ended up having an interesting recruiting method for this because, cold calling farmers, just being like, hey, I'm Mandy, a complete stranger, can you give me a call? Doesn't work. So what I ended up doing, I got in my car and I went to Vermont and I just drove into farms. And I was like, hi, do you hate ticks? Because me too. So luckily that worked. We had a 98% recruitment rate with that, because nobody wants to save the ticks. So it's pretty easy. If you're like, hey, I want to kill ticks, everybody's like, welcome, come do that. So we did get 45 farms that way. And then as a way to complete the, what are your thoughts and perceptions of tick-borne diseases, in the survey, the baseline survey that we did with them, we just added some open-ended questions to just ask those. Because they're happy to talk to us, but they didn't want to come on my Zoom. So from those, few farmers are willing to spend over $50 on a tick-borne disease prevention method. Some of it is that, I'm a farmer, it comes with the territory. It's a risk that's gonna happen. I'm gonna get bitten by ticks, I might get some sort of tick-borne disease. And they also want a guarantee. I think there are very few prevention methods that are just 100% for avoiding tick bites. So they kind of want that guarantee if they're gonna put any sort of financial backing into it. And we wanted to know what prevents them from using these prevention strategies. So time. They just don't have time. I mean, these guys work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So even just adding something like spray your clothes with permethrin, or buy the permethrin impregnated clothing, or put these tick tubes out. It's a lot. It's another thing they need to do. So they don't have the time, and we just finished our final survey, and Destiny's been writing up these results, but a lot of them have said, what would help us is if you guys keep coming to the farm and putting these out for us, which we would love to do, but we need the funding for that, and I'm not sure that's gonna work. Money, this is where our too broke and too tired comes from. They don't wanna put that financial, and these tick tubes are not very expensive. They're about $2 a tube, but we did land on these because you can make them yourselves. If you save toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, whatever, you don't even need to buy cotton, you can save dryer lint, and then just buy the permethrin. So this is why we landed on this, because this is one of the cheapest, most DIY sort of things you could do. And one of the farmers, we had a phone call just last week, and she said, we put our passion above our health. We're trying our best not to lose what we have. So it's just, tick bites and tick-borne diseases are not seen as a top priority until they've had one. Which is not, from the prevention perspective, we don't, I mean, of course we want to prevent secondary infections, but we want to prevent the first one too. We don't want people to have to go through that to realize it's a problem. So we're kind of working on that to like motivate them to do that, and also ease of use, which is why we landed on these, very simple. And then the reasons that they have for using a prevention strategy is if it's easy, if they've experienced something or someone very close to them has experienced a tick-borne disease, and also their perception. You know, how big of a risk is this? And what are the other priorities on top of this? So for the randomized control trial, this is a picture of the Thermacell tick tubes, if anyone hasn't seen them. The idea behind these is that cotton is treated with permethrin, which is an acaricide. It kills ticks on contact. So mice, the most competent reservoir, will go in, get that cotton for nesting material, and basically it's like putting a flea and tick collar on a mouse. So any ticks that are on the mice will die. So kind of after a lag period, you will see a decrease in tick density. So farms are huge. So we can't bait an entire farm. That it's just not feasible. You know, some of the farms in our study are over 800 acres. You're not going to bait the entire thing. However, what we wanted to see is if we place these tubes in areas of high rodent traffic, so around barns, around houses, so where you have the rodents and where you have your farmers really interacting with their environment. You know, can we recreate this? So we have two groups. We have our treatment group and we have our control group. We've been working with Thermacell, so everybody has tubes. One has permethrin, one does not. So Destiny and I are blinded to that right now. We don't know who's who, but we will soon. So we have two outcome measures for the study. So one, we ask them, every 2 weeks, we follow up with the farmers and we say, have you, anybody else on your farm or any animals had any ticks in the last 2 weeks? So they did this for 32 weeks for 2 years. So yeah, I know, crazy, right? So we were hopeful that this would be useful, because especially someone like an outdoor worker, if I come back to you in 6 months and say, give me an exact number of how many ticks bit you in the last 6 months, or how many were crawling on you, I wouldn't know how many I took off my dog. So we did every 2 weeks, and we got very lucky. We have an excellent group of farmers in this study, and for those follow-ups, again, 32 weeks, 2 years straight, we have a 99% response rate. So incredible group of farmers. And then our second is tick density. So we dragged, that corduroy cloth, using yourself as bait, to see, what the difference in tick density is between the start and the end. So we haven't finished the project yet. What we do know, so with the tick encounters, so we did tick encounters. We did ask if it was biting or crawling, but we did record all of them. So some of these are just crawling ticks, not necessarily biting ones. Unfortunately, there is no significant differences between the treatment and control groups for reported tick encounters. We did bait kind of the farm proper, I guess you could call it. So a lot of people, we asked them if they knew what they were doing when they got bit. Overwhelmingly, our response was fence repair. So unless these fences are within like 150 feet of these buildings where we put the tubes, the home range of a mouse, they're not going to be doing anything. So if they're 2 miles down the road fixing fences, we're not doing anything there. So that's certainly something to think about. We are going in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, back to do our last tick collection, and then we'll have that data, and we're hoping that is a little more favorable. And we're hoping if it is favorable that some of these farmers will adopt it. A lot of the answers we're getting are, we'll do it if you come back and do it every year for us. So we're hoping we can motivate them to do it. We do have ones that are motivated to adopt these prevention strategies, but they're the ones that have had Lyme or they've had anaplasmosis. We've got one farmer in our study. He was really excited to sign up for it because he got Lyme disease. He put off diagnosis because he's fatigued, he's achy. Wow, he's a farmer, surprise. So he put it off. He ended up getting Lyme carditis. He had a pacemaker. He burned through that in under a year, and then he very recently had open heart surgery. So he takes it very seriously now, whereas he didn't before. So we want to avoid things like that. We don't want to see that happening. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah.
So you're saying that you haven't yet seen a significant, as of right now, a significant drop in density?
Well, the density we don't know. That's just the reported tick encounters. Yep.
Have you also, at this point, also looked at, has there been a decrease in the pathogenicity of the ticks?
So we don't have the funding to test the ticks. I do have them in a drawer, and I think Yetrib wants them, so we can find that out. Yes, I have a tick drawer in my office. Yep.
What is the effectiveness of the usually advised things like permethrin, soaked clothing, and DEET all over your skin?
So DEET, the studies very much go back and forth. It's like 50-50. Like half the studies will say there is a significant difference if you wear DEET versus not, but half of them say there is no difference. But permethrin, the University of Rhode Island did a study on permethrin. Even if you just spray shoes and socks, you are 74 times less likely to be bitten by a tick. So that was something we thought about at the beginning, but in terms of kind of doing a very controlled study on it, it's really hard, especially with farmers. You can put spray counters, but farmers, like a lot of people, are way more concerned with their families than themselves. So there's no way of knowing, were your clothes sprayed, or was it your kids or your wife's or whoever. So it's something we always push for them, and we've given a few farmers permethrin to use on their clothing. But in terms of studies, that one's a little more difficult.
So for your home, you use toilet paper rolls with cotton and soaked it permethrin?
Yeah, you spray it with the permethrin.
And near the house or away from the house?
So anywhere that you would expect rodents to be. So if you have any rock walls, wood piles, things like that. But I just want to note, always read the instructions on any pesticide you use. But permethrin, when it's wet, is harmful to cats. When it's dry, it's fine. But just be mindful of where you're spraying permethrin when you're doing it. It is on the label, so if you read that, you'll know. Yeah.
It's to a big property, so sort of say like wood piles or stuff like that. Around there or something, how do I secure them because they're so light?
So you don't necessarily have to secure them. We did for the study because we wanted to see like cotton use on each one. So we just got, what are they? The little like gardening hooks, like the little U-shaped ones. So you just kind of put it over. They're the exact size of a toilet paper roll. So you can just put them over, and that'll stake them down. And generally, we did pretty good. Some of the farm dogs get a little crazy, but generally they stayed where we wanted them to.
How often do you have to soak the cotton?
So the cotton, you don't have to re-soak that ever. So generally, you put them out kind of mid to late April, sort of right when tick season starts, when spring starts. Then you'll replace them again in late June, and then you replace them again in late August or early September. So yeah. All right, thank you everybody.